Why was everyone staring at the broken glass, as if the sound itself had betrayed a secret? It had shattered in an instant, crystal fragments catching the airport light, my father's laughter still echoing as the room froze around him. Even the four-star general stopped mid-sentence. And in that stunned silence, I realized the truth was finally visible. But stories like that don't begin on polished floors or in front of powerful men. They start where pride is born, at kitchen tables that smell like motor oil and yesterday's dinner. A week earlier, I'd come home to Springfield, Ohio. The town looked smaller than I remembered, streets quiet, factories tired, the ghosts of work whistles long gone. Inside the house, Dad sat at the kitchen table, cleaning his old VFW cap with the kind of care other men reserved for medals. The faded photo of his factory crew still hung on the wall, men with arms crossed and eyes that once believed steel and sweat could hold the world together. "Back already?" he asked, not looking up. "Just for the weekend," I said. "Got a flight Monday." He grunted. "Commercial or that hobby thing you do?" That hobby thing was my company, Morgan Aero Logistics. 2 light jets, 1 turboprop, and a handful of contracts that kept medevac and defense cargo moving up and down the East Coast. Built from nothing after I left the Navy. But in his eyes, if I wasn't covered in grease, it didn't count. He sighed. "You could have stayed home. Learned real work. Tool and die never lies to you." "Neither do flight instruments," I said softly. He chuckled. "Those lie all the time. Pilots just don't notice till it's too late." Mom tried to break the tension, setting a plate of cornbread between us. "Frank, let her eat first." He wasn't done. "So what's this flight, flying some salesman to a convention?" I hesitated. "A 4-star general, actually. Short hop to Norfolk for an inspection." That caught him. He leaned back, skeptical. "General, huh? They hire civilians for that now. Guess they'll let anybody fly military brass these days." Mom gave me a warning look. "Don't bite." I smiled instead. "You and Mom should come see the takeoff. It's early, but you'll like the hangar." He waved me off. "I'll believe it when I see it. A general on your plane." His tone carried half disbelief, half challenge. Later that night at the VFW hall, I watched him brag to his friends about my little flying gig. He didn't mean to hurt. He just couldn't imagine my world. "She flies around," he told them, shrugging, "still figuring it out." Laughter rippled around the table. I smiled on the outside, but inside something old and sore twisted tighter. My phone buzzed, a message from Jen Robert Ellison. "Appreciate your team's quick response last week in Baltimore. Looking forward to meeting the crew." Baltimore, the medevac storm run. We airlifted a child named Ruthie after flooding trapped her hospital wing. We beat the storm by minutes. That flight had reminded me why I still did this, why I chose risk over comfort. Dad saw the name flash on my phone screen. "General, huh? Sure, you always were good at telling stories." Later, as Mom walked me to the door, she whispered, "He loves you, Claire. He just doesn't know how to say it. All he knows is pride and hard work." I nodded. "Yeah, but sometimes pride's louder than love." Saturday morning came gray and cool. Dew clung to the air like it didn't want to let go of the night. I stood at the small regional airport where I'd first learned to fly. Same hangar smell, part jet fuel, part coffee, part memory. My crew was already prepping. Luis Ortega, my operations chief, waved from the tarmac, clipboard in hand. "Fuel's topped off. Weather looks smooth," he said, grin easy, eyes alert. "Good," I answered. "Let's keep it that way." The sound of boots on concrete made me glance back. Dad, followed by Mom carrying a thermos. "So this is it," he said, scanning the hangar. "Your big operation." "Morning to you too," I replied. Mom smiled, holding up the thermos. "We brought coffee." Dad's eyes roamed over the 2 jets, polished silver, our logo freshly painted. "Looks smaller than I imagined." I bit my tongue. He wasn't mocking, not really, just nervous. He always hid nerves behind sarcasm. Lewis walked up, headset around his neck. "Ma'am, fuel's verified," crew briefed. "Thanks, Sergeant," I said automatically. Dad blinked. "Sergeant." "Air Force, retired," Lewis said proudly. "Best boss I've had since." Before I could respond, the crunch of tires on gravel turned our heads. A black SUV rolled up, its windows tinted precise. Even before the door opened, I could feel the shift, the atmosphere tightening, the world narrowing to the sound of that engine. Out stepped General Robert Ellison, stoic, polite, eyes scanning the scene like radar. Dad straightened instinctively, posture stiff. "That him," he muttered. "Yep," I said quietly. Ellison approached, hand extended. "Captain Morgan, good morning." "Good morning, Vice Admiral. Sorry, old habit," Lewis teased from behind. I shot him a look. "General, these are my parents, Frank and Mary Morgan." Dad shook his hand, firm, testing the man like a wrench he wasn't sure would hold. "Pleasure," he said, then added with a laugh meant to fill silence. "She's just a disappointment, you know. Never stayed long in one thing, but she means well." The words hung heavy in the cool air. The general's face didn't change. His eyes only moved to me, then back to Dad. He didn't reply. I checked my watch. "Pre-flight time, please excuse me." The air behind me felt heavier as I walked away. Words bruised deeper than fists sometimes. But revenge wasn't the goal. I just wanted truth to speak for itself. And it would, soon. The next morning, the airport was wrapped in mist, the kind that makes the world look unsure of itself. I arrived before sunrise, jacket zipped high, coffee in hand. Inside the lounge, the printer clicked out weather updates. Lewis was already there, studying the fuel numbers like scripture. "Morning, boss," he said. "Winds calm, visibility 10 miles once this fog burns off." "Perfect," I said, setting down my clipboard. "Let's make it smooth." I wanted this flight perfect, not to impress the general but because my parents would be there. I needed them to see, not hear, the truth. At 6:12 a.m. the glass doors opened. Mom entered first, scarf tucked neatly under her coat. Dad followed, eyes narrowed, leather jacket worn and proud. "Well," he said, glancing out the window at the tarmac. "You weren't kidding. Place is bigger than I thought." I led them closer to the viewing area. The floodlights painted the plane in gold against the fog. Mom whispered, "Beautiful machine." "All computers," Dad muttered. "No soul." "Computers don't complain when you fly through thunderstorms," I said. Lewis approached again, radio clipped to his belt. "Ma'am, General's car is 5 minutes out." "Good, let's run pre-flight now." Dad followed me onto the tarmac, hands deep in his pockets, watching every motion as I circled the aircraft, checking static ports, tire pressure, hydraulic lines, trim tabs. Routine, yes, but sacred. "All that for one short flight?" he asked. "All that so everyone makes it home," I replied. He smirked. "You always were dramatic." Before I could answer, the SUV returned, doors opening in smooth sequence. 2 Air Force escorts stepped out, then General Ellison himself. He looked the same, weathered face, silver hair cropped close, a quiet authority that didn't need volume. I stepped forward. "Good morning, Captain Morgan," he said. "Still captain when it matters," I answered. He smiled faintly. "I heard you're the one who kept that Baltimore evac from turning into a disaster." "Lucky timing and a good crew, sir." Dad hovered nearby, half listening, half disbelieving. He didn't know who Ellison really was, not yet. Mom offered coffee, black 2 sugars. "Just black," the general said kindly. While Lewis and I went over the passenger manifest, I heard Dad strike up conversation. "You in the military too?" he asked casually. The general raised an amused brow. "Still am." "Well, I tell you, these kids today," Dad said, gesturing toward me, "always chasing fancy dreams. My daughter here, smart, sure, but no grit. Can't stick to one thing, just a disappointment sometimes." The words fell like a wrench onto concrete. Lewis froze mid-sentence. My pen hovered over the logbook. I didn't turn, I just breathed. One slow inhale. The general's tone stayed calm. Is that so? Dad shrugged. No disrespect, she means well. But all this flying business, it's not real work. Not like back in the day when men built things. I initialed another line, steady hand, steady voice. Left fuel tank secure. Check. The general said quietly, Sir, you might be surprised what real work looks like these days. Dad chuckled, missing the edge beneath the words. Maybe. Mom looked mortified. Frank, that's enough. He waved her off. Relax, I'm making conversation. Lewis leaned close. You okay, ma'am? I've heard worse, I murmured. But something in me shifted, not anger, just certainty. Let truth show itself. I signed the last page, handed the clipboard to Lewis. We're set. Boarding at 0700. Copy that. As I walked back toward the lounge, the sun finally broke through the fog, light cutting through like forgiveness through pride. The reflection of the jet shimmered in the glass doors. I paused, watching it. Inside, Mom sat stiffly, avoiding Dad's eyes. The general spoke to an aide, then glanced toward me with a look that said he understood everything without needing words. When the boarding call came, my chest tightened, not with fear but with inevitability. The truth was waiting at 30,000 feet, and there was no walking away once the cabin door sealed. I still remember the way the engine sounded that morning, alive, confident, unstoppable. Dad's voice would fade beneath it. The fog would lift, and somewhere between takeoff and sky, the man who called me a disappointment would meet the woman he never thought existed. Because some lessons can't be told, they have to be flown. Why did silence feel heavier inside a jet than anywhere else? Maybe because once the cabin door sealed, there was no escape from truth. Only air and altitude and what you carried inside. The engines hummed low as the passengers settled. Morning light leaked through the cabin windows in thin, golden stripes. I stood near the galley, watching Dad glance around like a man who'd stepped into someone else's dream. Nice seats, he muttered, running a hand over the cream leather. Smells expensive. Smells like maintenance done right, I said, checking the overhead latch. He ignored that, eyes shifting toward the cockpit. So who's the pilot, your boss up front? I turned, you're looking at her. He blinked, you. Still me, I said with a small smile. Same boss I had in the Navy, me. For once, he didn't have a comeback. The general was seated now, flipping through a small folder. He looked calm, an island of order in a space filled with tension. Lewis gave me a quick nod from the cockpit, ready. I took one last breath, checked the clock, and stepped forward. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Morgan Herrero Logistics Flight 31. Estimated time to Norfolk, 1 hour, 10 minutes. Please fasten your seat belts. My voice was steady, professional, but underneath the words, my pulse kept a second rhythm, one that sounded a lot like old resentment. Mom smiled up at me. You sound just like you used to on the phone, calling home from deployment. Guess some habits stick, I said softly. Dad just stared. His jaw worked but no sound came out. I stepped into the cockpit. Lewis was already flipping switches. Clear right, I asked. Clear left, he answered. The twin engines roared to life, their vibration running through the yoke, through my hands, through me. That sound, steady, controlled, was home. Taxi to runway 27, I called to ground control. Morgan 3-1 cleared via Alpha. Good morning, Captain. Morning, I replied, easing the throttles forward. The jet rolled, smooth and sure. Outside, the world slid past, the hangars, the control tower, the small crowd of morning workers who paused to watch. From the cabin, through the reflection in the cockpit door window, I could see Dad's face, half awe, half disbelief. At the threshold line, I took a deep breath. Morgan 3-1, cleared for takeoff. Copy 3-1. Lewis glanced over, grin wide. Let's give them a ride they'll never forget. I pushed the throttles forward, the engines surged, the runway blurred, my heart steadied. Rotate, I said, lifting back gently on the yoke. The nose lifted, then the world fell away. The Ohio fields turned to patchwork green. The river curved like silver ribbon beneath the morning haze, and the jet climbed. We broke through the last layer of cloud, and sunlight poured in like absolution. Lewis laughed quietly. That never gets old. Never does, I said. 10,000 feet, pressurization stable, climb rate smooth. Through the cockpit glass, the horizon stretched wide and endless. But I wasn't looking at that. I was thinking of Dad, how small he must feel in a space built on the very thing he doubted I could master. At 12,000 feet, I glanced through the cockpit door again. Mom was looking out the window, hands clasped in quiet wonder. The general was reading, his expression unreadable. And Dad, he was still rigid, staring at the clouds like they'd betrayed him somehow. You think he's starting to get it? Lewis asked. Maybe, I said, but some lessons need altitude. We leveled off at 28,000 feet. The sky deepened from gray to pure, sharp blue. I handed control to Lewis. Take it for a few, I'll do a walkthrough. He nodded, copy that. The cabin was hushed except for the low hum of air through vents. I moved down the aisle, checking belts, glancing at the passengers. Mom smiled as I passed. Everything's perfect, honey, you were made for this. The general looked up. Smoothest takeoff I've had in months. Thank you, sir. Then came the line, the one that cracked everything open. He turned toward my father. You mean this is your daughter's aircraft? The question hit like turbulence. Dad blinked. Her what? The general's voice stayed calm, almost kind. This jet, Morgan Aero Logistics. She built it, owns it, flies it. He paused. Impressive resume for someone you called a disappointment. For a moment, no one breathed. Dad's hand trembled around the stem of the champagne glass he'd insisted on pouring earlier. His knuckles whitened. Then crack. The glass slipped, hit the floor, and shattered into glittering shards. Sound vanished. Even the engines seemed to hold their breath. I knelt, gathering the pieces with a napkin. It's fine, I said softly, just a spill. But it wasn't fine. It was the sound of something breaking inside him, and maybe inside me too. When I looked up, his eyes met mine, startled, hollow, afraid. Not of me, but of truth, the kind that doesn't ask permission. The general gave a quiet nod of respect, then turned back to his folder. No one spoke. I walked calmly to the cockpit, folded the napkin of shattered glass beside me, and stared out at the clouds. We were flying smooth, but everything beneath us was shaking. Lewis noticed. You all right? Just turbulence, I said. He glanced over, from outside or inside. I didn't answer. For a while, all that existed was rhythm, the checklist cadence, the instrument glow, the endless hum of airspeed and altitude. But no matter how fast we flew, the memory of his voice kept catching up. She's just a disappointment. At 24,000 feet, the headset crackled. Cleveland Center, Morgan 3-1, climb and maintain flight level 290. 3-1, climbing to 290, I replied. Lewis adjusted the throttles, climbing. The plane's nose tilted upward again, a quiet climb through pale blue. You ever think about your dad? I asked softly. Lewis didn't look away from the gauges. Every day, he died thinking I wasted my life in the Air Force. When I came home, the house was gone. Bank took it. Did you forgive him? He exhaled slowly. Forgiveness ain't a door you open once. It's one you keep from slamming shut. That line stayed with me. At 28,000, the air smoothed out completely. I unbuckled, stepped out again for a walkthrough. Mom smiled faintly when I passed. Everything all right? Perfect, I said. How's Dad? She lowered her voice. Quiet, shocked, I think, maybe embarrassed. I looked toward him. His hands were folded, gaze fixed out the window. The reflection of clouds danced in his eyes like water. I could see the exact moment pride gave way to recognition. Did you know? I whispered to Mom. I knew you were doing well, she said. But not this, you don't talk about it. I learned that from him, I said. The general overheard. He looked up from his folder. Ms. Morgan, he said, voice crisp but warm. Your company been on my radar for a while. You've done more for logistics in 6 years than some divisions manage in decades. Dad stirred. You're serious. The general nodded. Her medevac team saved lives last month in the Baltimore floods, including a little girl named Ruthie. Dad blinked. Little girl. I met his eyes. She's the reason we got that contract. She's why we keep flying. He opened his mouth, closed it again, and looked back out the window. I sat across the aisle, finally letting my shoulders drop. I didn't start this company to prove you wrong, I said quietly. I just wanted to build something that mattered. He didn't look at me. His voice was tight. Didn't realize you remembered any of that. I remember everything, I said. Silence filled the space between us, steady, humming, forgiving. Then the jet jolted, light turbulence barely enough to rattle the cups. Mom gasped softly. Just rough air, I said, smiling. Happens even on clear days. Dad gripped the armrest, knuckles white. You're not even touching the controls. It's flying itself, I said, but I'm still here if it needs me. He studied me for a long moment. Guess that's the difference between trusting a machine and trusting the person who built it. Or the one who raised the person flying it, I said. That earned a faint smile, the first since we'd taken off. The general stood, bracing himself on the seatbacks as he walked forward. We're ahead of schedule, he said. Nice work, Captain. Thank you, sir. He looked at my father again, kindly this time. Mr. Morgan, it's a rare thing to raise a daughter who serves without a uniform. Most of us never figure out how to do both. Dad swallowed hard. His eyes glistened just enough for me to notice. Guess I didn't figure much out at all. The general smiled. Figuring it out isn't as important as showing up when it counts. He returned to his seat, leaving silence and altitude behind him. Louis leaned toward me. He's thinking about everything he ever said to you. I know, I whispered. You're not gonna gloat, are you? No, I'm just letting the air do its job. Thinner up here, harder to breathe but cleaner. Outside, the clouds broke open, sunlight flooding the cabin again. The Chesapeake shimmered below like liquid gold. For the first time that morning, my heart felt light. Because up here, between earth and sky, the truth finally had nowhere left to hide. The clouds began to thin, a soft golden light spilling through the cockpit like something sacred. Below, the coastline appeared, a sweep of silver and green where land met ocean. Louis adjusted the throttles. Descent checklist, he said. Flaps set, pressure stable, I replied. My voice sounded calm, too calm, the kind that hides tremors. From the cabin, I could hear faint movement, seatbelts clicking, murmurs soft as prayer. Somewhere between 20,000 feet and the runway, the silence had shifted. It wasn't awkward anymore. It was heavy, but alive, like something was changing shape in the air. Norfolk Tower, I radioed. Morgan 3-1, inbound from Springfield, requesting approach clearance. Morgan 3-1, cleared ILS runway 23. Winds calm, visibility 10 miles. Copy that, cleared 2-3. Louis gave me a small grin. Home stretch, Captain. Yeah, I said, let's make it count. Outside, the Chesapeake shimmered like a promise we hadn't earned yet. The sun caught the water in shards of light that reminded me of glass, that glass, the sound still echoing somewhere deep in my chest. I glanced back at the cabin through the small window. Dad was staring out, hands clasped, shoulders slumped. Mom leaned close to him, whispering something I couldn't hear. The general sat quietly, pen moving across a small leather notebook. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't angry. I was just tired. Tired of proving, tired of waiting for a man who loved me but didn't understand how. At 5,000 feet, Norfolk spread beneath us, runways gleaming, hangars shining like steel cathedrals. Lewis checked the final approach speed. "Winds are perfect," he said. "She's all yours." "Copy." I eased back on the throttles. The aircraft settled, steady and sure. The shoreline flashed by, the waves catching sunlight like sparks. The wheels kissed the runway, firm, smooth, no bounce. Lewis smiled. "Nice landing." "Let's make it matter," I said softly. We slowed, reversed thrust humming like distant thunder, then silence again. As we taxied toward the hangar, I caught Dad's reflection in the glass. He looked smaller somehow, like the truth had pulled the ground out from under his pride. "Morgan 3-1, taxi to military hangar Bravo. Welcome to Norfolk." "Appreciate it," I replied. The engines wound down, that slow sigh that always feels like the end of something big. Lewis unbuckled. "Cabin's yours." I nodded, unstrapping and standing. My hands brushed the folded napkin on the console, the one still holding pieces of shattered glass. I didn't throw it away. Maybe I wasn't ready. When I stepped back into the cabin, Mom clapped softly, trying to break the tension. The general smiled at her kindness, his eyes flicking briefly toward Dad. "Flawless flight," he said. "Your daughter's reputation is well earned." Dad didn't answer. I opened the door. Warm, salt-thick air swept in, carrying the tang of sea and jet fuel, my kind of perfume. Lewis set the stairs. The general disembarked first, straightening his uniform, expression composed but kind. A few Navy officers were waiting near the hangar doors, clipboards in hand, headsets on. One stepped forward, saluting. "Captain Morgan, your donation of storm pods last month saved 2 crews during the floods. Base commander sends his thanks." Dad blinked. "Donation?" I nodded. We had spares after the Baltimore mission. Figured they'd do more good here than in a warehouse. The man grinned. "You ever need hangar space, ma'am, you got it. This base owes you." "Just doing my job," I said quietly. Behind me, Mom smiled through tears. Dad stared, silent, like a man watching the map of his life redraw itself. Then a small voice called out, "Miss Morgan." I turned. Near the hangar door stood a little girl, brown curls, pink sneakers, oxygen tubing around her ears. It took me a second to breathe. "Ruthie." Her mother nodded, eyes glistening. "We heard you were coming. She's been drawing your plane every day since." Ruthie beamed. "I can walk now. Doctor says I can go home soon." Dad's head turned sharply toward me. "You flew her?" "Yeah," I said. "Baltimore storm. She was our last evac before the roof gave in." Ruthie reached into her backpack, pulling out a crumpled drawing, a silver jet with a blue tail and the words, "Thank you, pilot lady," written in uneven letters. My throat closed up. I knelt to her level. "You keep that courage, okay?" She nodded solemnly, like she understood more than adults ever do. The general stood nearby, quiet, respectful. "That's the real medal, Captain," he said softly. We moved into the hangar for debrief. A folding table waited, stacked with forms, maintenance sheets, and a contract folder stamped Morgan Herrero Logistics. "Your daughter's work isn't just impressive," the general told my father. "It's building something." Dad frowned, confused. "Building?" I took a breath. I started an apprenticeship program back home. Toolmaking, composite repair, structural work. We hire veterans, machinists, kids who can't afford college. He blinked. "You did that?" "Yeah," I said. "Got the idea watching you at the factory when I was little. You taught me how precision and pride could live in the same hand." He rubbed the back of his neck. I thought all that was dying out. It's not dying, I said softly. It's evolving. The general closed the folder and extended his hand. Mr. Morgan, your daughter's bridging generations. You should be proud. Dad hesitated, then took his hand. Thank you, sir. Outside, sunlight spilled across the tarmac, glinting off the hangar doors as they slid open. The smell of salt and jet fuel mixed in the breeze. The general turned back once more. Captain Morgan, he said, don't lose that quiet strength. It commands more respect than shouting ever could. Yes, sir, I said. Then he looked at my father. You raised a leader. Sometimes leadership looks like defiance until the world catches up. Dad said nothing. He didn't need to. His face carried a strange mixture, regret, pride, disbelief, and something that might have been peace. When the last handshake was done, Mom touched his arm gently. You okay, Frank? He stared at the open hangar, eyes damp. Yeah, just thinking. We stood there watching the ground crew tow another plane inside. Ruthie waved from across the ramp before her mother led her away. Dad exhaled. That little girl, she's walking because of you. Because of a team, I corrected. But yeah, we got her there. He swallowed. I was wrong. I didn't speak. He wasn't ready to say more, and I wasn't ready to hear it. But something between us had shifted, lighter, easier, like the air after a storm. Lewis appeared beside me, clipboard tucked under his arm. Plane secure, boss. Good, let's grab lunch before heading back. Dad hesitated. Can we stop by that shop of yours, the one with the apprentices? I smiled, really smiled for the first time that day. I'd like that. The hangar door clanked fully open, sunlight flooding the floor like forgiveness. Behind us, the echo of shattered glass faded at last into quiet peace. The sign outside the old VFW hall flickered like an aging heart. Half the letters burned out, the rest buzzing faintly against the evening sky. The parking lot smelled of gravel and beer. We'd flown home that morning, but the real landing, the one that mattered, happened here at dusk, when Dad finally asked, You still stop by the post sometimes? So we went. Inside, the air was thick with floor wax and country music. The same photos lined the walls, proud men, uniforms pressed, smiles faded but steady. Frank, someone called. Haven't seen you in a month of Sundays. Been busy, he said. Then motioning toward me, you remember my daughter Claire? A few of them nodded. Heard you gave a general a ride, one of them teased. I smiled. He was lighter than the luggage. Laughter broke the ice. We sat at the counter. The bartender, Hank, poured 2 mugs of coffee. On the house, he said, for a local hero. Hero's a stretch, I said. Just did my job. Dad stared into his cup, quiet. Then he said, voice low, You know, I used to bring her here after Little League. She'd sit there coloring while we played cards. Hank chuckled, same serious face even back then. For a while it felt almost normal again. Then the quiet came, the kind that leaves no room to hide. Dad set his mug down carefully. Claire, he said, voice rough, I owe you an apology. I didn't move, just waited. When the factory shut down, he said slowly, I felt like my whole life got scrapped. 30 years of work gone, guys I trained scattered. I started to think if a job didn't leave grease on your hands, it wasn't real. When you said you wanted to fly, I thought you were running from real life. He paused, swallowing hard. Turns out you were running toward it. The jukebox seemed to go silent. Even the lights dimmed a little. I was jealous, he said finally. You found purpose when I couldn't. I reached over, touched his wrist lightly. You taught me what purpose looks like, Dad. Precision, patience, pride. You built things that lasted. I just took that and built upward. He laughed softly, voice cracking. Guess that's why you call it aircraft. We both smiled. And for the first time in years, we weren't arguing. We were just 2 people sitting in the same silence, finally hearing each other. The door opened behind us. letting in a gust of cool air and a familiar voice. "Permission to join you too." I turned. General Ellison stood there, no uniform this time, just jeans and a windbreaker. "Always," I said. He ordered coffee, sat beside us, and looked around the hall like he'd stepped into his own past. "My father used to bring me to places like this," he said quietly. "He told me a nation's strength isn't in its speeches, it's in its coffee cups." That earned a few chuckles. Even Dad smiled faintly. "General," Dad said, "you could drink coffee anywhere, why here?" Ellison stirred his cup. "Because this is where honor lives when nobody's watching." He looked at my father. "Frank, you raised a woman who understands that. She didn't have to shout her worth. She just kept showing up." Dad's voice wavered. "I wasn't exactly humble about her." Ellison shook his head gently. "Humility isn't never being wrong. It's admitting when you are." The words landed soft but deep. Somewhere in the background, the jukebox started up again. Slow, familiar, like an old song remembering itself. Outside, the night had turned cool and still. For the first time in years, peace didn't feel like distance. It felt like landing. The door creaked again, before anyone could speak. Lewis stepped in, still wearing his worn maintenance jacket, a box tucked under one arm. His face carried that easy grin that could disarm even the hardest day. "Sorry to crash family night," he said, walking toward us, "but I brought something." He set the box down on the bar, sliding out a framed photo wrapped in paper. When he peeled it back, even the low light caught it like a spark, our jet on the Norfolk tarmac, sunlight slicing across its fuselage. Beside it stood me, Mom, and the General. In silver marker, someone had written across the bottom, "Pride flies higher when it lets go." Dad frowned, blinking at the words. "You wrote that?" he asked Lewis. Lewis shook his head. "Nope. Ruthie did. We mailed her a photo. She sent that back yesterday, said to give it to the pilot lady's dad." The air seemed to change temperature, quieter, thinner. Dad's lips parted, but no sound came out. He reached for the frame like it was something fragile, wholly even. "That little girl," he said, voice cracking. "She remembers," I whispered. He looked down at the silver letters again. "Pride flies higher when it lets go. She came up with that." Lewis nodded. "Guess she understands more about gravity than any of us." I felt the lump rise in my throat. The jukebox played something slow and familiar, the kind of tune old soldiers hum when they've run out of words. Dad rubbed his thumb over the glass, eyes distant. "You know," he said quietly, "I used to think pride was the only thing that kept me standing." Ellison leaned forward, hands clasped. "Sometimes it keeps us standing so long we forget how to move." Nobody said anything for a moment. The room just breathed with us. The hum of the old ceiling fan, the distant sound of rain tapping the windows, the clink of mugs from across the hall. Then Hank, the bartender, leaned over. "That your plane, Claire?" I nodded. "Ours, really, built by every set of hands that refused to quit." He tapped the frame. "Then that's not just a photo, that's a bridge from his world to yours." Dad looked at me then, really looked, and for the first time I didn't see judgment in his eyes. I saw something else. Wonder, maybe, or recognition. "You know," he said slowly, "maybe it's time I stop complaining about the world changing and start helping it change, right?" I smiled softly. "I was hoping you'd say that." He chuckled, still half in disbelief. "What would I even do? I haven't touched a real machine in years." I leaned in. "We could use someone like you at the shop. The new recruits could learn a thing or two about metal that doesn't come from textbooks." He hesitated, searching my face. "If you'll have me." "Always," I said. Ellison raised his mug, lifting it slightly in a toast. "To fathers who learn, daughters who forgive, and the work that still keeps us honest." We clinked coffee cups, not champagne, not ceremony. Just quiet porcelain, warm and steady. The sound was soft but sure, like the echo of that broken glass finally finding a new shape. Outside, the night had settled over Springfield in stillness. The parking lot shimmered faintly with dew. The air smelled of rain and old asphalt. Dad slipped his hands into his jacket pockets as we walked toward the truck. "You think I can still teach those kids anything?" he asked, almost sheepish. I smiled. "Are you kidding? You built the machines that taught me." He chuckled, shaking his head. "Guess I did at that." We didn't talk much on the drive home. We didn't need to. The silence was no longer a wall, it was a bridge, carrying more truth than words ever could. As the streetlights passed over the windshield in slow rhythm, I realized something. Forgiveness doesn't come in a single moment. It comes in waves, one truth at a time, washing over years of pride until all that's left is understanding. 2 weeks later, the workshop doors opened for the first time. The rhythmic hiss of air compressors filled the space, blending with the metallic tap of hammers and the buzz of conversation. Rows of veterans and apprentices stood at benches, shaping composite panels, measuring tolerances, checking rivet lines with laser precision. Sunlight poured through the high windows, bouncing off aluminum sheets until the whole place shimmered like a promise kept. Dad walked slowly down the line, wearing safety glasses and a faded denim shirt. A badge on his chest read, "Frank Morgan, Master Machinist." He stopped beside a nervous young apprentice who was tightening a torque wrench too hard. "Listen to that click," Dad said. "It should sound clean, not forced. Try again." The kid adjusted, tried once more. Click, perfect. Dad grinned. "There you go. Feels different when it's right, doesn't it?" "Yes, sir," the kid said. "Don't call me sir," Dad replied, smiling. "Just Frank." I stood a few paces behind, clipboard in hand, watching the scene. The man who once measured the world in thousandths of an inch was now measuring it in patience. And somehow, that felt even more precise. At lunch, we sat on the back steps overlooking the small airstrip behind the shop. Student pilots practiced pattern work, their planes circling in graceful loops above us. The air smelled of jet fuel and fresh-cut grass. He handed me a brown paper bag. "Turkey sandwich, extra mustard, just how you like it." I laughed. "You remember that, but not my birthday." He grinned. "Hey, priorities." We ate in comfortable silence, the kind that only comes after long battles are finally laid to rest. "You know that glass I dropped?" he said after a while. I nodded, hard to forget. He reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out a small object wrapped in tissue. Didn't seem right to throw it away. I unwrapped it slowly. Inside was a smooth, clear paperweight, and inside that, suspended like memory, a single shard of that shattered champagne glass. The inscription on the base read, "The day my pride broke so my heart could open." My throat tightened. "Dad." He shrugged. "Didn't want to waste good crystal. Figured I'd turn it into something useful." I laughed softly. "You even fix your mistakes like a machinist." He smiled. "Guess that's how I'm built." The afternoon sun tilted low, filling the hangar with gold. The apprentices' chatter echoed faintly, blending with the hum of air tools, the sound of work, of purpose, of life moving forward. Later that day, Mom stopped by with cookies for the apprentices. She wore her usual smile, the one that could warm metal if it tried. She placed a framed photo on the wall near the office door. It was Dad at his old factory, grease on his face, standing beside me in my Navy flight suit on the day I earned my wings. Beneath it, a small brass plaque read, "Do it right or don't do it, Frank Morgan." Dad rubbed the back of his neck, embarrassed. "I didn't say that to sound wise." "Didn't matter," I said. "You said it because you believed it." He looked around at the workshop, the drills whirring, the apprentices laughing, the rhythm of tools striking metal. "Feels like the old days," he said, "only cleaner." "Cleaner," I agreed, smiling, "and maybe a little wiser." He chuckled, maybe so. A week later, the general came to town for the ribbon-cutting ceremony. The mayor gave a short speech, reporters snapped photos, and the apprentices stood in their boots like proud soldiers. The general shook Dad's hand. Heard you're training the next generation. Dad smiled. Trying to. Turns out they teach me more than I teach them. Then Ellison turned to me. You did it, Captain. You turned pride into purpose. Couldn't have done it without him, I said, nodding toward Dad. The general looked at both of us, eyes steady. That's how families win wars they never meant to fight. The words stayed with me long after the applause faded. That evening, after everyone had gone, Dad and I sat in the hangar doorway, watching the sunset melt over the horizon. The last light caught the planes parked on the ramp, their wings glowing gold. You know, he said quietly, I used to think pride was what kept a man standing tall. And now, I asked. He exhaled slowly. Now I figure it's love that keeps him from falling apart. I smiled. Sometimes it takes a little shatter to find that out. Yeah, he said, nodding, sometimes. We sat there until the sun disappeared completely, the world turning soft and blue. A small cargo plane lifted off in the distance, its engines humming into the dark. We listened until it was gone, until all that remained was peace. Not the kind that's quiet, but the kind that forgives. And somewhere deep inside, the sound of that shattering glass, the one that started it all, softened at last into something almost musical. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. The morning after the ribbon cutting, sunlight streamed through the wide hangar doors like a second chance. The air inside the workshop carried that familiar scent, metal, oil, and coffee, the smell of purpose. Machines whirred to life one by one, the steady rhythm of drills mixed with laughter from the apprentices. Someone had turned on a small speaker, low jazz playing under the hum of compressors. Dad stood near the first workbench, arms crossed, watching a young man measure a rivet line. He didn't say much at first, just observed the way the kid held his tools, too tight, too nervous. Finally, he stepped forward. Relax your hand, he said. The metal listens better when you're not yelling at it. The kid blinked, then loosened his grip. The tool clicked softly, perfectly. Dad smiled. There, now you're talking the same language. I stood by the doorway, coffee in hand, watching him. The same man who once thought my world was made of dreams was now shaping the hands that would build its future. When I'd first started this program, I'd imagined workshops full of machines. But now, watching them work, veterans, students, second chancers, I realized it wasn't about machines at all. It was about people remembering what they were capable of. Lewis came up beside me, wiping his hands on a rag. Feels different in here lately, he said. Yeah, I said, like the air's lighter. Or maybe the ghosts finally clocked out. That made me smile. You think he's happy? I asked, glancing toward Dad. Lewis followed my gaze. He's not just happy, he said. He's proud, and maybe that's new for both of you. Maybe he was right. The apprentices lined up for a quick morning brief. Dad led it naturally, clipboard under one arm, his voice calm but firm, the same tone he used to use on me when I was little, teaching me how to tighten bolts on his old truck. Precision isn't fancy, he said. It's respect. You give the material your best and it'll give you its strength. They listened like every word mattered, and maybe it did. When he finished, he caught me watching and grinned. Don't look so surprised. I still remember how to teach. I raised an eyebrow. I never doubted that. He laughed. You doubted everything else, though. Fair, I admitted. He turned back to the class. All right, let's get to work. And remember, if it's worth building right. That line echoed through the hangar, simple but solid. I wrote it down later, thinking it deserved to live somewhere on the wall. At noon, the hangar quieted for lunch. A few of the veterans ate together at a long table near the back, trading stories about deployments, storms, and near misses. Others drifted outside, sitting on crates under the sun. I joined Dad near the back steps again, same spot as before. He had a sandwich and a thermos beside him. "Brought you lunch," he said. "Didn't know what you wanted, so I made the usual. Turkey, extra mustard." He smirked. "You think I forget the important stuff." We ate in silence for a while, watching the small aircraft practicing takeoffs and landings in the distance. "Funny," he said finally. "Used to think the sound of planes meant distance. Now it sounds like home." "Guess that's progress," I said. He nodded slowly. "Yeah, progress." A breeze rolled in from the runway, carrying the faint smell of jet fuel. For once, it didn't sting of separation, it smelled like belonging. "You ever think about flying again?" he asked suddenly. "Every day," I said. "But not the way I used to. I think about what it means now, not just where it takes me, but who it brings along." He looked thoughtful, then said, "You know, when I was your age, I thought building things was the only way to prove I mattered. Now I see it's not about building. It's about passing it on." I turned to him. "That's the difference between creation and legacy." He smiled. "Guess you learned that faster than I did." "Maybe," I said, "but you're teaching it better." He looked out at the airstrip, squinting against the sun. "Maybe that's what forgiveness is, just teaching what you once couldn't say." I didn't answer. I didn't have to. That afternoon, a delivery truck pulled up, supplies from the base. The driver handed me a clipboard and a small package with a return label marked Norfolk Command Office. Inside was a folded note. "Captain Morgan, heard about your workshop expansion. Your father should know the program inspired a proposal here, a partnership to train veterans for airframe production nationwide. Keep building bridges. Gen. Robert Ellison." Beneath the note was a small brass medallion, the Navy's logistics merit token, engraved with the words, "For service that sustains." I showed it to Dad. "He sent this?" he asked quietly. "Yeah," I said. "Guess the general doesn't forget." Dad turned the medallion over in his hands, the metal gleaming in the sunlight. "You know, when you flew that man, I thought it was just a job. Turns out it was a reckoning." "Maybe it was both," I said softly. He smiled faintly. "Well, if you see him again, tell him he's got a seat waiting at our next shop barbecue." I laughed. "I'll tell him." The next few weeks moved like chapters we hadn't realized we were writing. The workshop filled with rhythm, drills, laughter, instruction. Veterans who hadn't touched tools in years found new steadiness in their hands. Kids from the community stopped by to watch, wide-eyed at the machinery. Mom set up a coffee corner, which quickly became the unofficial heart of the place. One evening, after the crew left, I found Dad standing alone near the back wall, staring at the framed photo of us in my flight suit. "You okay?" I asked. He nodded, just thinking how far we both had to go to meet in the middle. I stepped beside him. "Worth the flight." He chuckled softly. "You know, I still hear that glass sometimes, the one I dropped. It's like it's reminding me not to get too sure of myself." I smiled. "Maybe it's not a warning. Maybe it's a reminder that even broken things can catch light." He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "You always did know how to turn pain into poetry." "Not poetry," I said, "perspective." He grinned. "Whatever it is, it works." We stood there a while longer, just listening to the quiet hum of the hangar cooling down for the night. The last rays of sunset hit the photo, turning the glass gold. For a second, it looked like the past itself was finally shining instead of haunting. A few days later, the general did visit again, unannounced this time. He arrived in civilian clothes, the same calm presence but with a softer edge. He walked through the workshop slowly, nodding to the apprentices, asking questions, touching the frames of half-built pods with quiet curiosity. When he reached Dad, he extended a hand. "I see you took my words seriously." Dad shook it firmly. "Didn't have much choice. The girl runs a tight ship." The general smiled. "So did mine." They talked for a while, about machinery, about discipline, about the strange peace that comes after a life of noise. I just watched, realizing how rare it was to see two men who'd spent their lives commanding things now listening instead. Before he left, the general turned to me. "You ever think about scaling this program, Captain, taking it beyond Springfield?" I nodded. "Already in the plans. We've had calls from 2 bases asking about joint training." "Good," he said, "because what you've built here, this isn't just a company, it's a compass." I felt that one deep. "Thank you, sir." He looked at Dad again. "You taught her precision, Frank. She taught you grace. That's how families evolve." Dad's voice was soft but sure. "Guess we're still learning." "Keep learning," the general said. "The world needs fewer walls and more hangars." He left us with that. Later that night, I found Dad closing up the hangar. The overhead lights flickered off one by one. The silence felt thick but gentle, like the world was catching its breath. "Remember when you said machines don't lie?" I asked. He smiled faintly. "I remember. You were right, they don't. But sometimes the people behind them need time to learn how to tell the truth." He looked at me, the lines in his face softer than I'd ever seen them. "Guess we finally learned." Guess we did. Outside, the runway lights blinked against the dark. A lone plane ascended in the distance, its engines fatting into sky. Dad exhaled, the sound almost like relief. "You think that's what forgiveness feels like, the quiet after takeoff?" I smiled. "No turbulence, just altitude." He laughed quietly. "I'll take that." We stood there side by side, the hum of cooling metal around us. The night smelled of oil, salt, and second chances. And somewhere above the quiet field, where the plane had disappeared into the stars, I could almost hear it again. The faint echo of breaking glass, not sharp this time, not painful. Just distant and clear like wind through crystal. It wasn't the sound of something ending anymore. It was the sound of something beginning. The mornings came earlier now. The workshop lights flickered on before the sun cleared the horizon, the smell of metal and ambition filling the air before most of the town had even stirred. By 6 a.m., the rhythmic hiss of air compressors had become the soundtrack of a second life. Veterans worked side by side with students barely out of high school, all of them chasing the same thing: steadiness, belonging, purpose. Dad was already there when I arrived. He always was. A mug of coffee in one hand, clipboard in the other, like some quiet guardian of the new day. "Morning," he said, eyes still on a set of schematics. "Morning," I replied, setting my bag down. "You've been here since 5 again, haven't you?" He didn't look up. "The machines don't complain, but the tolerances sure do." I smiled. "You ever going to retire?" He smirked. "Retire from what purpose?" I laughed softly. He'd changed, but not that much. The apprentices started to gather near the main table. Lewis handled the morning safety check with his usual mix of humor and precision. "Remember, your tools aren't the enemy. Your ego is. Respect the machine, and it'll respect you back." Dad nodded approvingly. "Smart man." Lewis winked. "Learned it from the boss." I raised an eyebrow. "Which one?" He grinned. "Both." That earned a chuckle from the room, a sound that still felt like sunlight every time I heard it. By mid-morning, I found myself in the office, surrounded by paperwork, new contracts, training applications, a proposal from Norfolk Command asking if we'd consider opening a second site. It should have felt exciting, but it felt heavy. The kind of weight that doesn't come from failure, but from growth. From realizing success brings its own storms. I stared at the letterhead for a long time. Expansion Program Proposal. My name, typed clean and official beneath the logo I once hand-drawn on napkins. The knock on the door startled me. Dad leaned in. "You look like someone deciding whether to jump or stay on the cliff." I smiled faintly. "Feels about right." He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "What's on your mind?" I handed him the papers. "They want us to open another facility. Norfolk's ready to fund it. It's big." He whistled softly. "That's more than big. That's legacy territory." "I know," I said quietly. "But it also means leaving. I'd have to spend months away. You'd have to run things here." He sat down across from me. "You think I can't handle it?" "No," I said quickly. "I know you can, but this place works because of us. Both of us together. I don't want to lose that." He studied me for a long moment. "You're scared of success." I blinked. "I'm not scared." He raised an eyebrow. "Then why are your hands shaking?" I looked down. He was right. My fingers trembled against the paperwork. "Dad, when I started all this, I thought if I just worked hard enough, built enough, flew high enough, I'd stop hearing that voice that said I wasn't enough. But now that everything's finally working," I trailed off, searching for words. "I don't want to break what we just fixed." He leaned back, eyes soft. "You won't break it, Claire. You'll strengthen it. That's what you do. You build things that keep flying even when you're not in the cockpit." The words hit somewhere deep. "Besides," he added with a grin, "I could use the challenge. Someone's got to keep these kids in line." I laughed, shaking my head. "You're impossible." "Genetically, yes." The tension eased. I folded the papers and set them aside. "Let me think on it." He nodded. "Just don't overthink it." "I'm a pilot," I said. "Overthinking's part of the job." "Then maybe it's time you fly on instinct again." He left me with that thought, the door closing softly behind him. That afternoon, a storm rolled in, not metaphorical, a real one. Gray skis thickened over the field, thunder low and steady. I watched from the hangar doorway as the first raindrops hit the tarmac, dark circles spreading across the concrete like ripples in time. The apprentices hurried to cover the equipment. Lewis shouted instructions over the wind. Dad moved with the same calm he used to have on the factory floor, checking doors, securing panels, steady as ever. The storm hit fast and hard, rain hammering the roof, the wind howling through open vents. Lightning flashed in the distance, turning the workshop windows into mirrors. I saw our reflections, all of us, small but steady, holding our ground against the noise. When it finally passed, we stood there dripping but grinning, surrounded by the smell of wet metal and ozone. "Guess the roof works," Lewis said. "Guess teamwork does too," I replied. Dad clapped me on the shoulder. "That's your answer right there." "What is?" He pointed toward the soaked crew laughing near the benches. "You're worried about breaking things, but look at them, they're stronger because of what you built, and so are you." I followed his gaze. He was right. Maybe growth wasn't something to fear. Maybe it was just another kind of flight, one that required trust instead of control. 2 weeks later, Norfolk sent an inspection team. Not military this time, civilian contractors and a few young officers shadowing for logistics training. Among them was a face I didn't expect. Ruthie. Older now, walking tall, her curls longer, no tubing on her cheeks. She carried a small clipboard and wore a volunteer badge that said Junior Engineer Intern. "Miss Morgan," she called out. I froze, then smiled. "Ruthie, what are you doing here?" "High school program," she said proudly. "They said I could shadow for the day. I want to design aircraft one day." Dad stepped up beside me, grinning. "You came to the right place." Ruthie's eyes lit up when she saw him. "You're her dad, right? The one who made the shiny plane parts." He laughed, guilty. She looked around the hangar wide-eyed. "It's huge. It smells like adventure." "Smells like hard work," I said gently. She tilted her head. "Same thing, isn't it?" Her innocence caught me off guard. The way she said it, like truth didn't need polish, just honesty. I nodded, yeah, same thing. All afternoon, she followed Dad and the apprentices, asking questions about tools, materials, wings, and flight. Her curiosity filled the hangar like light, cutting through the noise of machines. At one point, she turned to me and said, "When I was in the hospital, I dreamed about flying above the storm. You made that real." I swallowed hard. "No, Ruthie, you did. We just gave you a ride." She smiled. "Then can I give you one someday?" That one line, so simple, felt like an answer to something I hadn't realized I was still asking. That night after the crew left, Dad and I sat by the open hangar doors again. The sky had cleared, stars scattered across the dark like sparks from invisible welders. He held a small drawing Ruthie had given him, another picture of our jet, this time with the words, "Build the sky you want to fly in." "She's something," he said softly. "She's hope," I replied, "the kind that doesn't need noise to be loud." He nodded slowly. "You think she'll make it, become an engineer?" I smiled. "She already is, she just doesn't know it yet." He was quiet for a while, then said, "You know, when you were little, you used to take my blueprints and turn them into paper airplanes." "I remember," I said. "You got mad when I used your good drafting paper." "Mad," he chuckled. "I was terrified you outbuild me." I looked at him, and did I? He turned toward me, eyes warm. "You didn't outbuild me, you completed me." The words hung there, honest and unguarded. I didn't reply, I just let them sink into the quiet hum of night. For the first time, the silence between us didn't need to be filled. It was enough to just sit there, the world humming softly around us, machines cooling, wind brushing the runway, 1,000 tiny stars reflecting off the metal wings parked nearby. Somewhere in that stillness, I realized the story wasn't about forgiveness anymore. It was about continuation, about learning that love isn't something you earn or prove. It's something you maintain like an aircraft, with patience, inspection, and trust. Dad stood finally, stretching. "You should get some rest. Big day tomorrow." "Always is," I said. He smiled. "Yeah, but tomorrow's yours." When he walked off toward his truck, I stayed behind for a minute longer. The hangar lights glowed warm against the dark, and for a fleeting moment I thought I heard it again, the sound of that long-ago glass shattering. Only this time, it didn't sound like breaking. It sounded like wings unfolding. The proposal sat on my desk for days before I signed it. Not because I doubted the idea, but because I finally understood what signing it meant. It meant trust. It meant leaving the place we'd built, even for a while, in other hands. It meant taking the risk of success. When the pen touched the paper, the ink flowed smoother than I expected. The sound it made, that soft scratch of commitment, echoed like a heartbeat. I exhaled, leaning back. "That's it," I whispered to no one. But Dad heard from the doorway anyway. "You finally did it." I turned, holding up the signed contract. "We're going to Norfolk." He grinned. "Then we'd better start packing blueprints." The expansion came fast, faster than I was ready for. One week, I was walking through our quiet Springfield hangar. The next, I was standing in a massive airfield hangar near the coast, surrounded by uniformed contractors and trainees waiting for orders. It felt like standing in front of a mirror, only this reflection was louder, busier, hungrier. Lewis stayed behind in Springfield to help Dad keep things running, but every evening they'd call, updating me on progress, mishaps, and little victories. "You should see him," Lewis said one night over the phone. "He's like the godfather of torque wrenches. The kids quote him now." I smiled, sitting on the edge of the rented cot in the Norfolk dorms. "Quote him, as in motivational quotes." "Oh yeah," Lewis laughed. "If you can't fix it with patience, you're using the wrong wrench." I laughed so hard I nearly dropped the phone. "That's terrifyingly accurate." Lewis's voice softened. He's proud, you know. He doesn't say it like that, but you can see it. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I could feel it even miles away. Norfolk was chaos, the good kind. The kind that smelled like oil, adrenaline, and change. Every day was a blur of meetings, measurements, and mentoring. I walked the floor, overseeing design revisions and safety tests, my boots echoing on the concrete. But no matter how busy it got, I couldn't shake one feeling, something I hadn't expected to find again: loneliness. At night, the hangar was quiet, the echo of tools replaced by the distant hum of waves outside. I'd sit on a crate near the open door, watching the sea lights flicker. And sometimes I'd talk out loud. To him, to the space between us. "Dad, you'd love this place," I'd say softly. "They're rebuilding a fleet of training aircraft. Everything, by the book. You'd lose your mind over how clean the welds are." The wind would move through the open bay, whispering like an answer. I'd smile, imagining him replying. Clean welds mean someone cared. That was the thing about missing someone you didn't lose. You missed them differently. Not with grief, but with gratitude. One afternoon, I received a call that made my chest tighten before I even said hello. It was Lewis. His tone was serious. "Claire, your dad's fine, he's fine, but he collapsed at the shop today." I froze, collapsed. He was working with one of the drills. Nothing major, just his heart couldn't keep up. I felt the world tilt slightly, the air thinning. "Where is he?" "County General. They're keeping him overnight, said it's precautionary." "I'm coming back," I said immediately. "Claire, the general's scheduled to visit tomorrow." "I don't care." My voice was steady but low. "Family first." The drive back to Springfield was long and rain-soaked. The highway lights blurred against the windshield, the wipers struggling to keep up. My hand stayed tight on the wheel, not out of fear, out of focus. When I finally walked into his hospital room, the sight of him hit me harder than the storm outside. He looked small in that bed, not weak, just human, mortal in a way I wasn't ready to see. His eyes opened as I stepped closer. "You came fast," he said, voice hoarse. "I broke about 6 speed limits," I replied, sitting beside him. He smiled faintly. "Didn't think I was worth the gas." "Don't joke like that," my voice cracked. He studied me for a moment, then said softly, "You've got that pilot's look again, the one you wear before a tough landing." I swallowed hard. "I'm scared, Dad." He exhaled slowly. "Me too, but you know what's funny?" "What?" He turned his head slightly toward me. "All those years I thought I was indestructible. Turns out, the only part that ever broke was my pride. The rest of me just needed maintenance." Despite everything, I laughed, a quiet, shaky sound. He reached out, resting a hand on mine. "Don't stop what you're building, Claire. Not for me. Not for anything, you hear? I can't do it without you." "Sure you can," he whispered. "You just don't want to. There's a difference." We sat there in the low hospital light, the machines humming quietly like background music to a truth we both understood. Love doesn't need strength to exist. It just needs presence. He closed his eyes then, still holding my hand. "You remember what I told you once." "Which part?" "That forgiveness isn't words, it's action." "Yeah," I said softly, "you proved that." He smiled, then promised me something. "Anything." "When I'm gone, not now, just someday, don't build statues. Build people. They last longer." I blinked back tears. "You're not going anywhere." He squeezed my hand gently. "Everyone goes somewhere. I just want you to keep flying when I do." The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was sacred. He was released 2 days later, against his doctor's cautious protests, of course. "I've got a shop to run," he said, signing the discharge papers himself. I stayed in Springfield for a week to make sure he rested. He didn't, not really, but he let me pretend he did. We spent quiet evenings at the hangar, watching the apprentices work. He gave pointers from a chair, voice softer now, but still sharp. One night, I caught him staring out the window, the reflection of the hangar lights flickering across his face. "Something on your mind?" I asked. He shook his head slowly. "Just thinking about legacy. You ever notice it doesn't announce itself? You only recognize it once it's already in motion." I sat beside him. "I think that's what scares people. They want to see it while it's happening." He smiled faintly. "And the trick is you can't, you just live it." He paused, then added, "You're living it right now, Claire." I looked at him, tired eyes, steady hands still stubbornly alive. "So are you." He chuckled, "Barely." We both laughed quietly, and the world felt smaller, safer, and beautifully unfinished. The night before I returned to Norfolk, we had dinner at Mom's old kitchen table, the same one that had heard our worst arguments and now hosted our quiet peace. He poured 2 glasses of apple cider, raising one. "To second chances," he said. I smiled, "and to not wasting them." We clinked glasses. The sound was small but certain, the kind of sound you want to remember. After dinner, as I gathered my things, he handed me something, a folded piece of notebook paper. "What's this?" I asked. "Something I wrote down after the hospital," he said. "Don't open it yet. Read it when you land back in Norfolk." I nodded, tucking it into my jacket pocket. He smiled. "You've got a flight to catch, Captain." I hugged him longer than usual. When I pulled away, he just nodded, as if to say, "Go finish what we started." The next morning, as my plane descended toward Norfolk, the sunrise stretched across the ocean like fire melting through glass. I reached into my pocket, unfolded the note. His handwriting, sharp, mechanical, but trembling slightly now, filled the page. "Claire, don't be afraid of altitude. It's not distance, it's perspective. The higher you go, the smaller fear gets. Remember, even the strongest wings need maintenance. And when the world doubts what a woman can build, just smile and say, 'Watch.' Proud doesn't begin to cover it." "Dad." The words blurred as I read them, tears catching the morning light. Outside the window, the clouds broke apart, and the airfield came into view, silver and alive beneath the dawn. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was flying away from home. I was flying toward it. And for the first time, I didn't need to hear his voice to know what he'd say. Because some lessons don't echo. They live quietly, in your hands, your choices, your heart. And they never stop teaching. The air smelled different that morning, sharp, metallic, and new. Norfolk's hangar was awake before sunrise, bathed in gold light filtering through the high glass. The sound of rivet guns, Sanders, and laughter blended into one heartbeat. I walked the floor slowly, tracing the lines of our latest aircraft, the Aero 9 training jet, a design we'd been refining for months. The nameplate wasn't official yet, but the team had already nicknamed it the Morgan. Lewis jogged up beside me, tablet in hand. "You ready for the test flight?" "Ready as I'll ever be," I said. He grinned. "You mean terrified as always?" I smiled, "Same thing." It had been nearly a year since Dad's hospital scare, 6 months since the Norfolk expansion launched, and 3 days since the Navy approved the final prototype for testing. I'd spent every minute of that year building, not just the jet, but the people, the bridges, the trust. And somewhere in the middle of all that noise, I realized I hadn't heard that old inner voice of doubt in a long time. The crew gathered on the tarmac as the wind kicked up. The morning sun gleamed off the fuselage, and the metallic skin seemed to breathe. As I climbed the ladder into the cockpit, my hands shook not from fear, but from reverence. I'd flown hundreds of hours before, but this was different. This wasn't about altitude or speed, it was about legacy. Through the glass canopy, I could see the horizon stretch, infinite and alive. "Control, this is Morgan," I said through the headset. "Pre-flight complete." Lewis's voice came through, calm and steady. "Copy that. Winds are steady, runway clear. Whenever you're ready, Captain." My fingers hovered over the throttle. For a heartbeat, I closed my eyes. I could almost hear Dad's voice. "Easy on the throttle. Planes don't like to be rushed, they like to be trusted." A small smile tugged at my lips. "Copy that, Dad." The engines roared to life. The vibration thrummed through my bones. And then acceleration. The hangar blurred past. The ground fell away. The sky opened up like a door I'd been waiting to walk through my entire life. At 3,000 feet, I leveled off, the coastline unfolding beneath me, blue water meeting the silver edge of the world. The plane responded like instinct, light and obedient, as if it had always been meant to fly. I thought of everything that had brought me here, the arguments, the silence, the breaking glass, the forgiveness that took years to learn. Every moment a rivet in the structure of who I'd become. "Altitude steady," I said softly. "Stabilizers responsive." Lewis came through the radio. "How's she feel?" "Like she remembers what freedom tastes like." He laughed through the static. "Then bring her home." But I wasn't ready to descend yet. Not just yet. I banked left, flying parallel to the ocean. The morning light scattered across the water, blinding and beautiful. That's when it hit me, the familiar ache that wasn't sadness anymore. It was gratitude disguised as longing. I reached into my flight jacket pocket and touched the folded note. His words were there always. "Don't be afraid of altitude. The higher you go, the smaller fear gets." He was right. When I landed an hour later, the team erupted in cheers. Lewis waved both arms, yelling something I couldn't hear over the roar of engines shutting down. As I climbed out of the cockpit, the sunlight struck something glinting near the nose gear. A small figure was standing there, shorter, lighter, and when she waved, my breath caught. Ruthie. She'd come down from Springfield with Dad. They were both here. She ran forward first, her curls bouncing, eyes wide. "You flew it, you really did." I laughed, sweeping her into a hug. "I told you, we build the sky we want to fly in." She grinned, and we just did. Dad walked up slower, a cane in one hand now, but his posture still straight. His eyes glistened with pride and something deeper, the peace that comes when old wars finally retire. He looked up at the aircraft, then back at me. "She's beautiful," he said. I nodded. "She flies like forgiveness." He chuckled. "Then she'll never crash." I smiled, tears blurring the sunlight. "You made it out here." He shrugged. "Wouldn't miss it for the world." Ruthie tugged on his sleeve. "You told me planes don't have hearts." He looked down at her. "They don't, but the people who build them do." She looked at me then. "Then you built yours into this one." That line, so simple, went straight through me. Maybe she was right. Maybe that's what we do when we create something honest. We hide pieces of ourselves in the things that can carry them farther than we can. Later, the three of us stood on the observation deck overlooking the hangar. The jet sat gleaming on the tarmac, the word Morgan stenciled on its side in dark navy paint. The crew was still celebrating, Lewis snapping photos, the general shaking hands below. Dad leaned against the railing, breathing slow. "You ever notice," he said softly, "the best machines don't make the loudest noise, they just run smooth." I nodded, "Like the best people." He smiled faintly. "You used to be so afraid to fail." "I still am sometimes." "Good," he said, "means you care." We stood in silence for a moment. The sound of gulls drifted over the wind, the ocean shimmering in the distance. Then he said, "When I'm gone someday, promise me something." I turned to him. "You've already got a list of promises I haven't finished keeping." "This one's simple," he said. "Don't name every plane after me." I laughed. "You hate your name that much?" He shook his head. "No, I just think you've got a name that deserves the sky too." I looked at him for a long moment. The man who'd once broken my confidence and then rebuilt it piece by piece with his humility. "You know," I said, "you used to be my storm." He raised an eyebrow. "And now?" "Now you're my compass." He exhaled slowly, looking away toward the horizon. "Guess I can live with that." A few weeks later, I returned to Springfield for a ceremony, the official dedication of our training program. The hangar was packed, veterans, students, mechanics, and families. On one wall, a new plaque had been installed. It read, "The Morgan Aviation Center, built by hands that believed." I stood at the podium, the sound of murmurs fading as I took the microphone. "Some of you know this story," I began, voice low but steady, "about a girl who grew up in the shadow of a man who built machines and a daughter who wanted to fly them. It took both of them years and one broken glass to learn they were never on opposite sides. They were just building different wings." The room was still, even the air seemed to listen. "My father taught me that pride without purpose is weight, but pride that learns, that forgives, is lift." I paused, finding his face in the crowd. He was smiling faintly, eyes glassy, hand pressed to his heart. "And if you remember nothing else," I said softly, "remember this: dignity doesn't shout, it builds, it forgives, it flies." When I stepped down, the applause rose, not thunderous, not showy, but deep and honest. Dad met me halfway, his cane tapping softly on the floor. "You stole my line," he teased. "Consider it inherited." He smiled, pulling me into a hug. "That's the best theft I've ever been a part of." That night, after everyone left, I stood alone in the hangar again. The silence was warm, filled with echoes of laughter and legacy. The workshop smelled the same, metal and hope and a little coffee. The machines were still humming faintly, cooling for the night. I ran my hand along the smooth metal of a wing, feeling its quiet pulse. In that touch I felt everything: the years, the scars, the lessons, the forgiveness, the love. Outside, a light breeze rattled the flags on the runway. I looked up and whispered, "Thank you, Dad." Not loud, not for anyone else to hear. Just enough for the universe to carry it where it needed to go. Because that's the thing about love built from forgiveness: it doesn't fade, it flies. It becomes the wind itself. Years later, people would still tell the story about the pilot whose father once mocked her in front of a general until the general said, "This is her aircraft." They'd talk about how she built a program that turned veterans into engineers, how a sick little girl became an aerospace designer, how a broken family built something that still flies. But I know the truth. It wasn't about medals or planes or pride. It was about the quiet work, the unseen bolts, the invisible glue of humility, the courage to love louder than you speak. It was about learning that the sky doesn't belong to the fearless. It belongs to those who keep flying even after they've fallen. And maybe that's what Dad meant all along. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. And sometimes, if you listen closely, it soars.